Most gardeners say they want more earthworms, then proceed to do everything that drives them away. They till aggressively, leave soil bare in summer heat, dump half-finished compost that turns anaerobic, and then wonder why they can dig a whole bed and only find 2 worms. That's not bad luck, that's management. If your soil doesn't have a steady, biologically active food source below the surface, worms won't stay. They don't live where there's occasional organic matter, they live where there's consistent, microbially rich decomposition happening at the right moisture and temperature. If you care about serious soil structure and nutrient cycling, subscribe now, because this channel is about systems that actually work long-term. So here's the weird thing I bury. Controlled pockets of preconditioned food waste mixed with partially finished compost, placed exactly where worms want it. Not kitchen scraps tossed randomly, not trench composting done carelessly. I'm talking about targeted worm feeding stations built directly into production beds. I stopped throwing scraps in compost and started feeding my beds strategically. Years ago, I noticed something interesting. Whenever I buried small amounts of fermented kitchen waste about 8 inches down in a tomato bed, worm activity exploded in that zone within 2 weeks. Castings increased, soil texture changed, roots grew aggressively toward that pocket. But when I buried raw scraps straight from the kitchen, especially high nitrogen materials like vegetable peels or coffee grounds, I sometimes created sour pockets. That attracts flies, not worms. The difference is preconditioning. Now I ferment my kitchen scraps lightly for 10 to 14 days in a sealed container before burying them. You can use a bokashi-style method or simply let them break down partially with a handful of finished compost mixed in to inoculate microbes. The goal is to start decomposition so worms aren't waiting on bacteria to do the initial breakdown. In a 4x8 raised bed, I dig 3 holes about 8 to 10 inches deep and 6 inches wide, spaced evenly down the center line between crops. Into each hole, I add roughly 2 to 3 cups of preconditioned scraps mixed 50-50 with crumbly compost. Then I backfill firmly and water lightly. Within 2 to 3 weeks, those pockets are worm hubs. When I gently check one section, I'll often find multiple worms concentrated there, with visible castings lining the cavity. Earthworms don't chase scraps. They chase microbes. Here's the correction most gardeners need to hear. Worms are not eating your carrot peels directly the way you think. They're feeding primarily on the microbes breaking them down. If decomposition is too hot, too dry, or anaerobic, worms avoid it. That's why monitoring compost temperature matters. When I build compost for this system, I aim for 130 to 150 degrees Fahrenheit during the active phase. That ensures pathogen reduction and proper microbial succession. I use the 36-inch stem model from the RioTemp store to check deep pile temperatures, especially in larger compost windrows. The long stainless probe gets into the core, not just the surface. If you're serious about compost quality, it's worth using a tool built for depth. I've linked it in the description if you want to see it. Once compost cools back down near ambient temperature and smells earthy, not sour, that's when it becomes ideal worm feed when paired with those preconditioned scraps. Placement matters more than volume. One mistake I made early on was burying too much at once. In one test bed, I added nearly a gallon of food waste in a single trench. That created localized heating and oxygen depletion. Worms stayed away for almost a month. Now I keep it modest. In a small backyard bed, 3 feeding pockets every 4 to 6 weeks during the growing season is more than enough. In larger in-ground rows, I'll dig a pocket every 3 feet along a crop row, especially for heavy feeders like squash or brassicas. In sandy soils, this technique dramatically improves aggregation. In clay-heavy soils, it creates vertical worm channels that improve drainage and root penetration. After one full season of doing this consistently, I can push my hand deeper into formally compacted beds without resistance. Moisture and temperature really decide whether worms move in. Worms need moisture between, roughly 60 and 80% of field capacity. At too dry and they just retreat deeper. At too wet and, oxygen drops. After burying a feeding pocket, I always water just enough to settle the soil but not saturate it. If you squeeze a handful of soil and it holds its shape without dripping, you're in the right range. Soil temperature also matters quite a lot. Worm activity slows significantly below 50 degrees Fahrenheit and above 85. In hot climates, I like to bury feeding pockets slightly deeper, closer to 10 inches, where temperatures are more stable. In cooler seasons, 6 to 8 inches is usually sufficient. I've tested this in raised beds, open ground, and even greenhouse soil beds right alongside hydroponic lines. In greenhouse systems where surface soils can dry quickly from ventilation, these buried feeding pockets maintain worm populations year-round because, the subsoil stays consistently moist. This really builds fertility from the inside out. What happens over time is actually more important than the initial worm attraction. Those concentrated feeding zones become micro-fertility hotspots. Roots grow toward them. Fungal networks expand. Castings accumulate. In one tomato bed last season, I measured noticeably thicker stems and darker foliage directly above previous feeding pockets compared to adjacent control areas that only received surface compost. Yields were about 15% higher in that section by weight. Same variety, same irrigation, just a different soil biology concentration. That's not magic. That's nutrient mineralization happening exactly where roots can access it. Hydroponic growers can adapt this principle too. If you grow in pure hydroponic water culture, worms obviously aren't part of your system. But in media-based or hybrid greenhouse setups where you maintain perimeter soil beds, this method works extremely well to build biological buffers around your production system. In large grow bags filled with cocoa or compost blends, you can bury small, inoculated compost pockets near the base as long as drainage is excellent. I've done this in 25-gallon containers with dwarf fruit trees and honestly observed significant worm colonization within 2 months. The trade-offs you need to understand. This method really requires consistency. If you bury scraps once and expect permanent worm populations, you'll be disappointed. Worms stay where food stays. It also requires a bit of restraint. Too much organic matter at once creates heat and anaerobic zones. Smaller, repeated applications win every time. And finally, you still need overall soil cover. Bare soil dries out feeding pockets faster. I pair this system with living mulch, or at least a light organic surface mulch to stabilize moisture. Over time, the soil really starts working for you. After 2 full seasons of targeted worm feeding, I no longer have to go looking for worms. They're everywhere. When I transplant seedlings, I routinely see channels lined with castings. Water infiltrates faster, soil smells richer. And here's the bigger point. Worms are not the goal, they're the indicator. If they're fighting over your buried pockets, it means microbial activity is high, moisture is balanced, and decomposition is happening efficiently. That's when nutrient cycling becomes steady instead of sporadic. If you're serious about building soil that produces stronger crops with fewer inputs, start thinking below the surface. Feed the biology intentionally, monitor your compost quality, control moisture, keep the system active. If this kind of practical field-tested approach to soil building resonates with you, subscribe to the channel and share this video with another grower who's tired of surface-level advice. The better we understand how soil actually functions, the better food we grow.